I'm Larry Unger, President and CEO of Maryland Public Television, and I'm here today with George Beneman, MPT's Chief Technology Officer. George, you've had a really impressive career, and you are Maryland Public Television's longest serving employee ever, and you were here before MPT went on the air in 1969. And while I really want to hear all about that and the changes that you've seen, let's start at the beginning. Tell me a little bit about where you grew up and your family.
Well, I'm a Marylander, starting in Cumberland, so I was in Cumberland through high school, and then I went to the University of Maryland, where, in those days, if you graduated from an accredited high school in the state, you got to go to College Park. I don't think today I would even come close to getting in any of the state schools. But while I was at College Park, I suddenly learned about television and theater, which was always been my love. And that sort of helped get me the job at MPT.
So did you go directly from college to MPT?
Well, there was a few stops in between. I'd worked at running theaters actually in the area. And in New Jersey, the theater I was running outside of Atlantic City was closing, and I was looking for a job. So, being a recent college graduate, I go to Camden County, which was close outside of Philly, and they were looking for teachers. They were short 200-300 teachers for the year. I come in all dressed up with my mutton chops, and I'm ready to teach anything. I could teach theater, I could teach English, I could teach early math. Thank you very much, Mr. Beneman, but we don't have a position for you. So then I'm going, now what am I going to do? My mother was talking to a good friend who worked in Cumberland on the school board. And he said, they're building a public television station in Owings Mills. Well, obviously we didn't know that. I had worked down the street for a number of years at Painters Mill Music Fair. Had no idea about Gwynbrook Game Farm, public television. So I showed up, walked in, got a job, and never left.
It's interesting, Music Fair. They had some of the biggest names around the country. Can you just talk for a couple minutes about your experience there, maybe who you saw?
Well, Music Fair was Star Theater, summer stock theater, whether it was Ethel Merman, Howard Keel, Bonnie Raitt's father, John, lots of acts, Liza Minnelli, Count Basie, Ella Fitzgerald. It could go on and on. So I think part of the reason I was hired was that my boss at the time, the production manager, Garen Mortensen, thought I could get him tickets for shows.
And what were you actually doing at Music Fair? What was your job there?
I started out in charge of the technical crew, so I've sort of always been background. And then I ended up working with the stagehands doing sound and lights.
And remind me what your degree was in.
I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts from New York University.
Okay, and was that in theater arts or?
Theater.
It was in theater.
But
okay.
It was really in lighting and production for theater with some television. One of my instructors was a gentleman named Danny Franks, and Danny was doing a lot of television lighting. One of his big clients was Billy Graham. So I got to work with Dr. Graham, and as they said, the pay's not good, but you won't have any problems.
And so tell me, what was your first job here at MPT, and did you think that you'd be here for another 50 years or so?
I thought I'd be here for about 2 to 3. I was hired as a camera operator. Huh? In those days, they were hiring lots of people. The studio crew had production assistants, camera operators, and the studio supervisor. Studio supervisor was responsible for bringing the sets in and seeing that the lighting was, and doing the lighting for the set. And then we had camera operators and production assistants who, floor directors, prompter. At that time, studio production was enormous. We have 3 studios. We were operating studios 5 days a week, 2 shifts a day. Part of our production, we did shows for Maryland Department of Education and Instructional Television, so they got about 1/3 of our production facility usage. And we would have in studio crews, now we have crews who are sort of both field and studio. Then the studio crew was studio crew, and there were 24 of us. So that was 4 crews of 6, so 2 PAs, 3 cameras, and a supervisor. And you were assigned to shows, and shows were produced on a weekly basis. So if you were doing Hodgepodge Lodge, so with Miss Jean, so we would do 2 shows a day, 1 before lunch, 1 after lunch, 2 on Monday, 2 on Wednesday, 1 Thursday evening. So 5 shows in 3 days, and those shows would air that week. So the show that was taped on Monday would probably air on Monday. There was no extensions. We need more time. Everybody had their time slot working on the old houseworks. So that was, 1 night a week, and you had your allotment of time, and you produce your shows. So a lot of what we're producing today, we produced similar shows 50 years ago.
So in 1969, everything was new. Public media was new. MPT was new. Tell me about the atmosphere here at that time. What was that like?
I don't know anything about public media. We were public television. Media was a new word. So we're out here sort of in the woods. Wonderful facility. This building was built for television and color television. We weren't a converted school or supermarket, so we were very fortunate that way. Actually, it's quite amazing that from the time the executive director, Rick Breitenfeld, was hired until we were on the air broadcasting with a full staff, 3 years. I don't know that you could do that today, but that was quite amazing.
Everything was new. I assume you were kind of making some of it up as you went along.
Well, we were making a lot up. The staff, most of us were not experienced television staff, so there was a lot of on-the-job training. We certainly had some marvelous people who had television training, and we had employees come from other stations, from Ohio, from Minnesota, from Texas, and they brought a lot of experience with them, and we learned. The staff was young. Most of us were in our early 20s, and if you spent 3 years working at the center, you ended up with a master's, if not a doctor's degree in television production. All skills were learned. Certainly always being a non-union facility, it was encouraged to do other skills, and most people got promoted from camera to, say, a studio supervisor, to master control directors, to television directors, to producers, and staff have gone on to famous jobs throughout the industry.
So one of the really big shows that was produced here, of course, was Wall Street Week with Louis Rukeyser. Can you talk a little bit about your experience, both with the program and with Louis?
I was fortunate that when they were starting the auditions for the show, I was the director assigned to do the auditions with the original panelists. So we became very friendly, and they became, my Friday night family. And then the show started. Louis came with the experience. The show, we started as a network show. At that time there was no PBS, but there was the Eastern Educational Network, which were stations from Maine down to Richmond, and the show was there. So we had reviews from New York, and the show caught on. And initially I think we were doing 39 weeks. We had the summer off. Show was either live or live to tape. And in those days, we were 28 minutes and 50 seconds, I think, was the show. So truly close to half hour, a lot longer than our current 26:46. And Louis always complained that where did my time go, that he lost time. The show was great fun. It had certainly an audience, quite a loyal audience all over the country. I think Lewis put Owings Mills on the map when he said, you know, Owings Mills 21117. Everybody sort of knew that. We were known. He was a great host, brilliant TV personality. A little tough at times to work with, but he was responsible for the show. One of the few talents I ever worked with that once you said begin, Lewis would tell you the time was up, and he was usually within 5 seconds.
Wow.
With time cues, without time cues. An amazing man. So I started, and I was the assistant director on that show. Steve McCullough was the original director. Brilliant, brilliant director. Taught a lot of us a lot about directing, very inventive. So he and Ann Darlington, who was the creator of the show. And then when Steve moved on to other jobs, I moved up to the primary director. And so I ended up directing the show for the rest of its run, which was a little over, I think, about 32 years. And so every Friday night, everybody worked on the show. Their families knew where they were. So Friday night, a lot of us were in Owings Mills. And the show was wonderful. Met great people, some wonderful stories. Sorry I didn't take some of their advice. Some you could have been really wealthy, others you could have been, you know, on the streets selling pencils. I mean, it was both highs and lows. And we got to travel the world.
How many years before they took the show on the road, George?
We were doing shows on the road within the first 5-10 years. We had a relationship with the BBC. They had the money program. We had Wall Street Week. They would come and do the money program in our studio. We would go to London and do our show in their studio. So it's not often I could say that I directed at the BBC, you know. And you know, it's nice when you go to a studio and they have a pub.
Very good. So 50 years, you've seen it all. You've seen all the projects. Are there some of those projects or programs that stick out to you and that you'll always have a memory of and feel good about?
Well, I think that, you know, you remember the shows that people tell you about. I mean, certainly Wall Street, the 30th from Carnegie Hall, quite memorable. The shows from London were memorable. The shows from Rio and that area were interesting. Language problem directing is not always the easiest. So there are good stories and bad stories. Shows from Dallas were great fun to do, Canada. So those, remember that. The On-Stage at Wolf Trap were wonderful shows, just being part of the theater background and working in that performance venue was always fun. Having to stop rehearsals at Wolf Trap because the cicadas were so loud you couldn't hear. Those were great stories. The Happy New Year USAs that I was the primary director on, and we had 2 or 3 units around shooting. Going to California and on the lot, John Podest, who was producing, and meeting people who were going to be with us, Mel Torme. So that was sort of fun, just being part of that. Ethel Ennis, who was a good personal friend, in the shows with her. The first Happy New Year we did from her club in Baltimore, Ethel's place, and yeah, just those kind of things stand out. Opening of Harbor Place was a big show. One of my other shows that I was thinking back was Aviation Weather, which became later morphed into AM Weather. And that started sort of we had a tape engineer here, Vic Turner, and Vic was a pilot. And he goes, you know, there's no weather briefings for pilots on TV. And he got money from Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, and we started the show. And we were live we started at 6:15 on Thursday and Friday, 6:15 in the evening, and again we did another show at 11:15. So how that changed, and that was a fun show to do, and I got to do a lot with the FAA. One was going to their training academy in Oklahoma City and flying a 707 simulator which I did not do a good job in. So those kind of experiences, I think that, part of this gets you places you don't normally go. We were doing some ITV shows, and we went to the backyard of the Smithsonian and saw what they were working on. So we saw planes that are now in the Air and Space Museum when they were just still doing that. So being behind the scenes is sort of always a fun thing.
So you were a long-time director, but now you're the Chief Technology Officer and have different duties. How did that happen, and how did you manage to make that transition?
I guess sort of luck, and maybe
I don't think so.
And maybe the Peter principle. I just happened to be there. They said, "Hey, there's an open seat. Will you take it?" I've always sort of been in the technical side. I miss the studio work. I think that's that creativity. This opportunity came, and I like the being there as the changing technology, and I like the idea of working with and mentoring staff. So that's been a good part of the enjoyable part, and watching the technology change. I mean, when we started, it was all lot studio based, or if you were doing location, it was film. So we had a film department shooting 16 millimeter film, editing film. We had composers on staff, we had writers on staff, scenic shops. Then all of that, as technology changed, and now we're into truly what you can do with a phone and shoot, edit, and great quality. When we used to go on location with cameras, they were all tethered to a truck. Now they're just on your shoulder. And although some of them are heavy, they're still a lot lighter than previous equipment.
Well, you talked a lot about change, and one of the biggest changes here, I think, and certainly most expensive, was the change from analog to digital. And I believe you were in charge of that. Maybe you can talk for a few minutes about that.
I was part of it. So certainly we were analog for a long, long time. And analog just worked. Sometimes the pictures were blurry or a little fuzzy or some noise coming in, but they were there, and everybody knew that. And you had sound, and most of it was mono and sort of morphing to stereo. And there was color, and it looked really good. And then we sort of were moving into high definition, and then digital came in, and the world changed. We went to ones and zeros, and digital television is excellent when you can get it. And if you can't get it, there's nothing. So that was a big change, and it was a change for all of broadcasting, because the FCC said, you're all moving to digital, and when they gave a very short window for it, which changed and became a very long window, but it was an unfunded mandate. So for Maryland Public Television, we're talking tens of millions of dollars to change out not only our broadcast equipment, but for transmitters. So new transmitters, new internal encoders, and then eventually new cameras, and then high definition cameras, and all the processing equipment, and the editing equipment, and it goes on and on and on. And all of that costs money, and thank you very much, the state of Maryland, for making all of this possible. But it was a major change for us, for viewers. The viewers who remember, the government gave out coupons for converter boxes to convert your analog television to a digital television. We did, all the broadcasters did all of these sort of on-air workshops of how to set up, how to receive. We transmitted both analog and digital signals for a number of years, so the switchover wouldn't be so onerous, but it was. I mean, all the Baltimore market switched over at the same time, and it was like all the phone calls. You went away, where are you? What can you see? What couldn't you see? And we all learned, and that was an expensive transition, and there's where we are today.
So that was a big transition, but that's now more than a decade in the past.
Easy.
I heard there's another change coming up. Can you?
Oh yeah, there's We did, the FCC took more of our spectrum away, or the channel numbers for most viewers. So used to be that it was 2 to 69, then it went to the 50s, and now we're into the really down into the 30s, so the frequencies are closer together. And the new standard is called ATSC 3.0. Digital originally was 1.0, and it's also called for marketing next-gen TV. It offers a great deal. Better pictures, better sound, more things you can do with sub-channels and captioning. And a lot of it is sales pitch, trying newer, better, but a lot of what's being asked and you can do with the newer standards, we could do with the older standards. We have just elected for either cost factors or consumer acceptance not to do a lot of that. But will it happen? It's going to be interesting to see. It's good for, I think we see it, we're going to try some pilots for emergency alerting and things that you can do with digital, with the 3.0. Part of it is, if you look at the emergency alerting, it will turn your television on. We've all known with your phone, your smartphone, certainly you get emergency warnings. And even if you have muted your phone, if it's on, that alert will come through. And the same thing with televisions. And it's going to be located, geolocating, so your area, your neighborhood. So all of that looks future to be good.
Well, that sounds terrific. Is that going to be here by the end of this year?
It's here now, Larry. It's just a matter of if you can watch it. We, Maryland Public Television, we are broadcasting a 3.0 signal. It's an upconverted of our main channel and have been so for about 2 years now. And I'm sure that there are probably 4 or 5 of us in Baltimore who are watching that signal. But if you're on cable or streaming, most people just don't go for that, watch that.
Let's switch gears a little bit, and maybe you can talk just a bit about how being at MPT all this time has affected your personal life and your growth.
Well, you know, I think that MPT has always been a family. And whether you like management or hated management, got along with your bosses, it was one thing. That was the professional end. On the other thing, we've always been a family. And if an employee's in need, everybody's there to help them. And that's been true really from day one. So I am one of, probably now about 24 who met my wife here. She started as a writer, and then she had a gardening show that she did. And so we're one of, as I say, about 24 who have met our spouses here, which that's a good part. And a lot of friends who I wouldn't have met otherwise and will be friends for the rest of my life. So that's good.
Well, seems to me finding Tina was a huge benefit.
It did. It just, yes. It certainly opened up my world and has made life wonderful.
So the few hours that you're not at MPT, what do you do on your own time?
I think about MPT because people are calling. That's a terrible thing with, I think, the internet and smartphones, is that you're really sort of never off the clock. But you sort of are on, which is my choice. It's not that I don't want to be on the clock. It's just that you do that. So, you know, now it's travel. I volunteer with the Coast Guard Auxiliary, so it's safety on water, teaching. I enjoy teaching, so teaching safe boating, and again, mentoring. So that's part of the free time.
So things are continuing to change, as we know. What kind of future do you see for public media and MPT in particular?
You know, everybody always looked for 5-year plans or 10-year plans. Years ago, a very smart technologist said if you really go past 3 years, you have no idea what you're talking about. Well, I think that's true. I mean, who knew what these changes would be? Who knew about a smartphone, a tablet? I mean, you know, even iPods and things, how that's changed. I mean, the music industry, that from vinyl to streaming, now back to vinyl. We'll see. Public media, I think, always has a role. We need supporters. We have a lot of competition now. If I wanted to do the George channel, I could take my phone, I could be streaming programs and have viewers and things. So that's difficult. Public television has a streaming app, as does everybody else. But then do you go back to your local channel? How do we differentiate ourselves from all the noise that's out there, from how much programming? That's going to be for another generation to figure out. Mine and few before me sort of figured it out and have kept this place afloat and successfully. We made it through the pandemic. Thanks to you, we didn't lay off anybody. Salaries weren't cut. We have certainly gone through layoffs and cuts and salary freezes, either through federal or whatever the reasons were. When we started, we worked a tough day. We worked 37 and a half hours a week. And then Governor Schaefer said, that's ridiculous. You need to work 40 hours a week. And we did all that without an increase in pay. It's time. So whether public media will succeed, you need to ask this younger generation out there. I'll be sampling it, but I don't know that I'll be contributing to the programming.
Well, first of all, I would watch the George channel.
Well, thank you.
Make no mistake about that. So I think we're coming to the end of our time. Is there anything you'd like to add, George?
Well, you could say, why am I still here? And a line I've used before is because you and your predecessors, none of you told me to get the hell out of here. You've all had the chance, and none of you took me up on it. So it's a good run. It's still a good run. I enjoy walking in the building every morning, and as long as I enjoy that, and you'll have me, I'll stick around and see what's coming up next.
Well, actually, I want to thank you for all the years and all that you've done for MPT. It would not have been the same place without you.
Well, thank you for that. I don't quite accept that because there were a lot who really made this possible. There were a number of fine directors. Steve McCullough, I think, should be singled out. And I think Tony Giuffre, who taught how to operate a camera. And Tony's instructions have led a number of our folks who started at MPT as either secretaries or writers, became camera operators, and became world-class camera operators. And still, in their advanced years, are running cameras on network shows across the country. So our alumni have done great things, and they all got their start and roots here, and it's fun to be a part of that.
Great. Well, thank you, George.
Thank you. And the check's going to be delivered when?
It's in the mail.
Sure. Thank you. I appreciate that.